The day I found out that clearing storm drains wasn't actually my responsibility was the same day I decided to stop doing it entirely. I'm Zachary Morrison, and I'd been living in the Pinewood Springs subdivision in Montrose, Colorado, for about 3 years when everything went sideways. My property sat on the highest point of the neighborhood, a quarter-acre lot with a decent view of the San Juan Mountains. Beautiful place, really, except for one thing. The Homeowners Association and its president, Patricia Henderson. Patricia was the kind of woman who measured her grass with a ruler and took photos of your trash cans if they were still on the curb past noon on collection day. She was 52, drove a white Lexus SUV, and had that haircut. You know the one. The "I'd like to speak to the manager" special. Short in the back, longer in the front, with blonde highlights that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. The storm drains thing started my first winter in Pinewood Springs. Colorado winters are no joke, and the 2023 season dumped nearly 6 feet of snow on us between November and March. The subdivision had been built in 2015, and the developer had installed a network of storm drains to handle snowmelt and rainwater. These drains ran down the hillside where all our houses were perched, collecting water and channeling it into the main drainage system that emptied into a retention pond at the bottom of the neighborhood. My property, being at the top, had 3 storm drain grates on it. One at the corner of my lot near the street, and 2 more along the natural slope of my backyard. That first winter, I noticed water pooling in my yard when the snow started melting in early March. Being a responsible homeowner, I went out and cleared the leaves, ice, and debris from the grates. Problem solved. Then Patricia showed up at my door 2 days later with a clipboard and that smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Zachary, I wanted to personally thank you for maintaining the drainage system," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "It's so wonderful to have a homeowner who understands his responsibilities." I should have questioned it then. Should have asked what she meant by responsibilities. But I was still new to the neighborhood, trying to be a good neighbor, so I just nodded and said, "No problem." That spring, I cleared those drains probably a dozen times. Every time snow melted or we got a heavy rain, I'd go out and make sure water was flowing properly. I noticed that several of my neighbors lower on the hill didn't touch their drains, but I figured they were just lazy. Water doesn't flow uphill, so if the top drains were clear, everything would work fine, right, wrong. The next winter, 2024, was even worse. We got pounded with snow from December through February. I'm talking about the kind of snow that makes national news. Montrose set records that year. My driveway became a tunnel, with snow banks on either side reaching above my head. And every time there was a brief warm spell, I was out there with my shovel and a metal rake, clearing those damn storm drains. Patricia sent me a thank you card that February. Actually mailed me a card, like it was a birthday or something. "Your dedication to community maintenance is exemplary," it read. "The HOA appreciates responsible homeowners like you." It was in March of 2024, during the spring melt, that things got interesting. My neighbor directly downhill from me, a guy named Robert Chen, knocked on my door one evening. Robert was a software engineer who worked from home, and we'd had a few beers together over the previous summers. Good guy, minded his own business. "Hey, Zach," he said, looking uncomfortable. "I hate to bring this up, but Patricia came by today. She said water was pooling in my yard because I wasn't maintaining the storm drains properly." "What you tell her?" I asked. "I told her the drains on my property were clear." She said that's not good enough, that we all need to make sure the entire system is maintained. Robert shifted his weight. "Here's the weird thing, though. She said you've been setting the standard for the neighborhood, that you've been doing it right since you moved in. That's when the first little alarm bell went off in my head. "Robert, do you have your HOA documents handy?" I asked. "Yeah, somewhere." "Why?" "Would you mind if I came over and we looked at them together? Specifically the part about maintenance responsibilities." 20 minutes later, Robert and I were sitting at his kitchen table with a stack of HOA documents, the original CC and Articles, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, and the subdivision plat map spread out before us. We started reading through the maintenance section. "Here it is," Robert said, pointing to a paragraph under Common Area Maintenance. "The HOA is responsible for maintaining all common areas, including but not limited to streets, sidewalks, streetlights, signage, landscaping in common areas, and the storm drainage system." I leaned closer. "Read that last part again." "Storm drainage system," Robert repeated. "Zach, it says the HOA is responsible for the storm drains." I felt my jaw clench. I've been clearing those drains for 2 years. Every single time it snows or rains heavy, I'm out there with a shovel and a rake, busting my back to keep water flowing. "And Patricia's been thanking you for it," Robert added, "making it seem like it's your responsibility." "I need to see my own documents," I said, standing up. "I'll be right back." 10 minutes later, I was back at Robert's with my own copy of the HOA paperwork. We went through it line by line. The language was clear. The Homeowners Association, funded by our quarterly HOA dues of $350, was responsible for maintaining the storm drainage system throughout the subdivision. Individual homeowners were responsible for their homes, yards, driveways, and any structures on their property. But the drains, those were HOA territory. "She's been scamming you," Robert said flatly, "getting free labor out of you." "But why?" I wondered aloud. "What's the point?" Robert pulled up the HOA financial statements on his laptop. As homeowners, we had access to them, though I'd never bothered looking before. He scrolled through the budget line items. "Look at this," he said, turning the screen toward me. "There's a line item for drainage system maintenance, $5,000 annually. So where's that money going?" I asked. "That," Robert said, "is a very good question." The next morning, I sent an email to Patricia, keeping it professional and polite. I simply asked for clarification on storm drain maintenance responsibilities, and referenced the specific section of the CC and Articles that stated it was HOA responsibility. I sent it at 9 in the morning. She responded at 9:45. "Zachary, while the HOA is technically responsible for major drainage system repairs and maintenance, individual homeowners are expected to perform routine clearing of drains located on or adjacent to their properties, as part of their general property maintenance obligations. This has been standard practice in Pinewood Springs since the subdivision was established. Your cooperation in maintaining these standards is mandatory under Section 3.2.5 of the CC and Articles regarding property appearance and maintenance." I read the email 3 times. Then I pulled out my CC and Articles and looked up Section 3.2.5. It was about keeping your lawn mowed and your house painted. Nothing about storm drains. She was making things up, counting on homeowners not actually reading the documents. I forwarded the email to Robert, then called my real estate attorney, Linda Martinez. I'd used Linda when I bought the house, and she was sharp as a tack. I explained the situation and read her both the CC and Articles section and Patricia's email. Linda was quiet for a moment, then said, "Zach, she's lying to you. There's no requirement for you to maintain those drains. In fact, you could potentially sue the HOA if you'd been injured while performing maintenance that was their responsibility." I'm not looking to sue anyone, I said. I just want to know my actual obligations. Your obligation is to pay your HOA dues on time. That's it. The HOA is responsible for the drains, period. If the president is telling you otherwise, she's either incompetent or she's misappropriating funds. What should I do? Stop clearing the drains immediately, Linda advised. Document everything. Save all emails. If they fine you or take action against you, call me. But Zach, here's the thing. If you stop maintaining those drains and nobody else does it, what happens when the snow melts? Water backs up, I guess. Flooding, probably. On whose property? I thought about the layout of the neighborhood. Water flowed from my property at the top, down through the various lots. The lower properties would flood, including HOA board members' properties. I pulled up the HOA roster. Patricia lived about halfway down the hill. The vice president, Sharon Klein, lived 2 houses below her. 3 of the 5 board members lived in the lower half of the subdivision. Yeah, I said slowly, including theirs. Then I'd say they have a vested interest in making sure those drains are maintained, Linda said. Just not by you, free of charge. I thanked Linda and hung up. Then I sent another email to Patricia, copying all 5 HOA board members. Patricia, thank you for your response. However, I've reviewed Section 3.2.5 of the CC and Articles, and it makes no mention of storm drain maintenance. The only reference to storm drain maintenance in our governing documents is in Section 7.3, which clearly states this is an HOA responsibility. Effective immediately, I will no longer be performing maintenance on the storm drainage system, as this is outside the scope of my obligations as a homeowner. Please ensure the HOA's contracted maintenance personnel address this as outlined in our governing documents. I hit send and waited. The response came faster than I expected. My phone rang within 15 minutes. Patricia Henderson's name flashed on the screen. Mr. Morrison, she said, and the fake sweetness was completely gone from her voice. I just received your email and I'm very concerned about your attitude. My attitude? I kept my voice level. I'm simply clarifying maintenance responsibilities based on our governing documents. Your refusal to perform basic maintenance on your property is unacceptable, Patricia snapped. Those drains are on your property, which makes them your responsibility. The drains are part of a common system that serves the entire neighborhood, I countered. They're not my personal drains, and according to our CC and Articles, maintenance of common systems is HOA responsibility, funded by our HOA dues. If water backs up and causes damage to other properties because you refuse to clear those drains, you will be held liable, Patricia threatened. Actually, Patricia, if water backs up because the HOA failed to maintain the drainage system that they're contractually obligated to maintain, the HOA would be liable. You might want to consult with the HOA's attorney before making threats. There was a long silence. Then, this isn't over, Mr. Morrison. She hung up. Robert came over that evening with a 6-pack of beer. We sat on my back deck, looking down the hillside at the neighborhood spread out below us. I heard you had quite the phone call with Patricia today, Robert said, twisting the cap off his beer. Word travels fast. Sharon Klein called me, asked if I'd been encouraging your defiance, her words, not mine. I took a long drink. What'd you tell her? Told her that you were right, that I'd looked at the CC and Articles myself, and that if the HOA wanted the drains maintained, they should maintain them. She threatened to fine me for having my trash cans out past noon last Tuesday. Were they? No, I don't even put my trash out on Tuesdays. Our pickup is Wednesday. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the mountains orange and purple. "It's going to get ugly, isn't it?" Robert finally said. "Probably. The snow's going to start melting in earnest next month when spring really hits," Robert continued. "We're sitting on at least 5 feet of accumulation. When that starts melting, if those drains aren't clear, then the HOA better get them clear," I said firmly, "because I'm not doing their job for them anymore." 3 days later, I received a formal letter from the HOA, sent via certified mail. It was a notice of violation and fine. The letter stated that I was in violation of Section 3.2.5 for failing to maintain my property, specifically the storm drainage system. I was being fined $500 and given 10 days to remedy the violation or face additional fines of $100 per day. I photographed the letter, scanned it, and emailed it to Linda Martinez. She called me back within an hour. "Zach, this is harassment. They're citing a section that doesn't even mention storm drains. This is a clear violation of your rights as a homeowner. What do I do?" You respond, in writing, stating that you are not in violation of any HOA rules or regulations, that storm drain maintenance is explicitly an HOA responsibility under Section 7.3 of the CC and Articles, and that any attempt to fine you or place a lien on your property will result in legal action against the HOA and its board members personally. I'll draft the letter for you, professional but firm. Will that stop them? Probably not. Patricia Henderson sounds like the type who doesn't back down until she's facing real consequences, but it creates a paper trail. When this ends up in court or in mediation, you'll need documentation showing you knew your rights and asserted them clearly. You think this is going to court? Zach, the HOA just tried to fine you $500 for not performing their job. Yeah, I think this is probably going to court. Or at least to arbitration. Linda sent me the response letter that afternoon. I signed it, mailed it certified mail, and emailed a copy to all 5 HOA board members. Then I waited. March in Colorado can be unpredictable. Some years, spring comes early and the snow melts gradually over several weeks. Other years, winter holds on until April, then suddenly breaks, dumping all that snowmelt in a rush. 2024 was shaping up to be the latter. The first week of March stayed cold, with temperatures barely climbing above freezing during the day. The snow sat there, compressed and heavy. I could see it from my back deck, covering everyone's yards like a thick white blanket. The storm drain grates in my yard were completely buried under at least 3 feet of snow and ice. On March 8th, I received another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that I was now being fined an additional $100 per day for continued violation. The total fine was now $1,700. I forwarded it to Linda without comment. She called me immediately. "Okay, this is escalating faster than I expected. I'm going to file for arbitration. In the meantime, I'm sending them a cease and desist letter. These fines are baseless and constitute harassment. How long does arbitration take? Could be a few months, maybe longer. The system's pretty backed up. The snow's going to melt before then." "I know," Linda said, "and that's probably what we want. If the drains aren't maintained and there's flooding, that demonstrates the consequences of the HOA failing to fulfill their obligations. Just make sure you document everything. Photos, videos, dates, times." On March 12th, the weather changed. A warm front moved in from the southwest, and temperatures jumped into the 50s. Sun blazed down from a cloudless sky. Snow started melting in earnest. I went out that afternoon and took photos of the storm drains on my property. All 3 were completely obscured by snow and ice. Then I walked down the street, photographing other drains throughout the neighborhood. Out of the 23 storm drains I could easily access, only 2 showed any sign of being cleared, and those were only partially open. That night, I heard water running outside. Not the gentle trickle of snowmelt, but a steady rush. I grabbed my flashlight and went out to investigate. Water was flowing down my driveway, following the path of least resistance since the drains were blocked. It was pooling at the bottom of my driveway, then sheeting across the street and into my neighbor's yard across the way. I took photos and video in the darkness, the flashlight beam catching the glisten of running water. Then, I went back inside and sent everything to Linda with a time-stamped email. The next morning, Robert called me. "Dude, my backyard is a lake. How bad? I've got 6 inches of standing water that extends all the way to my back fence. It's not going anywhere because the drain at the bottom of my yard is buried under ice. Have you called the HOA?" Called and emailed. Patricia said they're assessing the situation, and that homeowners need to take responsibility for maintaining drainage on their own properties. She's going to stick to that lie right up until the water reaches her door, I said. I was wrong. It didn't take that long. By March 14th, temperatures were hitting 60 degrees during the day and staying above freezing at night. The snow was melting fast, creating rivers of water that flowed downhill, seeking the drains that were still blocked solid. Water pooled in yards, creating ponds and marshes. It flowed over driveways and sidewalks, seeking any path downward. My phone started ringing. Other homeowners in the neighborhood were calling, asking if I knew what to do about the flooding. I told them all the same thing. Contact the HOA and demand they maintain the drainage system as specified in the CC and RTKS. On March 15th, I woke up to find an emergency meeting notice had been emailed to all homeowners. The meeting was scheduled for that evening at 7 o'clock at the community clubhouse. The subject, drainage system emergency. I forwarded the notice to Linda. Should I go? Absolutely. Record everything if Colorado's a one-party consent state. It is, so you're good. Don't say much, just listen. Let them talk themselves into a corner. The community clubhouse was packed that evening. Every seat was filled and people lined the walls. I recognized most of my neighbors, including Robert, who gave me a nod when I walked in. The mood was tense, angry. Patricia Henderson stood at the front of the room with the other 4 board members seated at a table beside her. She looked stressed, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, makeup not quite as flawless as usual. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Patricia began. "As you're all aware, we're experiencing significant drainage issues throughout Pinewood Springs due to the heavy snowfall this winter and the rapid melt we're currently experiencing. Because the drains haven't been maintained," someone called out from the back. Patricia's smile tightened. "The HOA has limited resources and relies on homeowners to assist with routine maintenance." "That's not what the CC and RTKS say," Robert spoke up. "Section 7.3 clearly states that storm drainage system maintenance is an HOA responsibility." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Patricia held up her hand. "While major system maintenance is technically an HOA obligation, routine clearing of drains on individual properties is a shared responsibility." "Show me where it says that," I spoke up from my spot near the door. "Show me in the governing documents where it says homeowners are responsible for clearing storm drains." Patricia's eyes found me in the crowd, and her expression hardened. "Mr. Morrison, I should have known you'd be here stirring up trouble." "I'm asking a legitimate question," I said calmly. "You keep claiming homeowners are responsible for drain maintenance. I'd like you to cite the specific section of our governing documents that states this." "This isn't the time for your confrontational attitude," Patricia snapped. This is exactly the time. Another homeowner stood up. I recognized him as David Park, who lived about halfway down the hill. My basement has 8 inches of water in it because the drain at the back of my property is completely blocked. I called the HOA 3 days ago, and nobody's done anything. Now you're telling us it's our problem. Other voices joined in, a chorus of complaints and frustration. Patricia tried to regain control of the meeting, but it was slipping away from her. The HOA budget doesn't have adequate funds to hire contractors for this level of maintenance, Sharon Klein finally admitted, her voice barely audible over the crowd noise. Where's the $5,000 budgeted annually for drainage system maintenance? Robert called out. The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at the board members. That money goes toward inspections and emergency repairs, Patricia said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. When was the last inspection? I asked. When was the last time the HOA actually paid anyone to inspect or maintain the drainage system? Patricia shuffled papers on the table. I'd have to review the records. I already did, Robert said, holding up his phone. I reviewed 3 years of HOA financial statements. Not once has any money from that drainage maintenance line item been spent on actual drainage maintenance. The account has been transferring money to the general fund, money that we paid in our HOA dues specifically for drain maintenance. The room erupted. Homeowners were shouting questions, demanding answers. The board members sat there looking like deer in headlights. Patricia tried to restore order, but nobody was listening anymore. Finally, a woman I didn't recognize stood up near the front. I'm Teresa Flynn, and I'm an attorney. I live on Meadowbrook Court. What's being described here sounds like potential misappropriation of HOA funds. I recommend we vote immediately to remove the current board and install an interim board to conduct a full financial audit. That's not on the agenda, Patricia protested. I don't care what's on your agenda, Teresa shot back. My basement is flooded, and apparently the money that was supposed to prevent this was diverted elsewhere. I'm making a motion to remove the board effective immediately. I second, Robert said instantly. What followed was chaos. Patricia insisted proper procedures weren't being followed. Teresa quoted various Colorado statutes regarding HOA governance and emergency actions. More homeowners spoke up, sharing damage to their properties. A man named Vincent Ramirez said his foundation was cracking from water pressure. A woman named Helen Torres said her sump pump had been running nonstop for 3 days and had finally burned out, leading to basement flooding. It took almost 2 hours, but eventually a vote was called. Of the roughly 70 homeowners present or represented by proxy, 63 voted to remove the existing board immediately. Only 5 voted against, and I was willing to bet those were friends or family of current board members. An interim board was elected on the spot. Teresa Flynn was voted in as interim president. Robert Chen agreed to serve as interim treasurer. 3 other homeowners I didn't know well filled out the remaining positions. Patricia Henderson stood up, her face red with anger and humiliation. This is a witch hunt. You'll hear from my attorney. She stormed out, followed by 2 of the other former board members. Sharon Klein and another board member stayed behind, looking shell-shocked. Teresa took Patricia's place at the front of the room. Okay, first order of business. We need to get these drains cleared immediately before more damage occurs. I'm going to call emergency contractors tonight. We'll figure out the cost and assess if we need a special assessment or if there are funds available. What about the $5,000 that was supposed to be there? Someone called out. That's going to require a full audit, which will take time, Teresa acknowledged. But that's a secondary concern right now. Primary concern is stopping the flooding. The meeting adjourned shortly after 9 o'clock. I waited until most people had left, then approached Teresa. "I'm Zach Morrison," I said, offering my hand. "I live up on Summit Ridge at the top of the neighborhood." Teresa shook my hand. "I know who you are. Robert told me you were the one who figured out the HOA was dodging their maintenance responsibilities. I just read the CC and Articus." "Which is more than most people do," Teresa said with a tired smile. "Look, I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Patricia Henderson doesn't strike me as someone who accepts defeat gracefully. And if there really has been misappropriation of funds, there could be legal consequences. I've got a real estate attorney, Linda Martinez. I can put you in touch if you need legal counsel for the HOA. That would be helpful, thank you." I gave Teresa Linda's contact information, then headed home. As I drove up the hill toward my house, I could see water running down the streets in the darkness, glinting in my headlights. The neighborhood looked like a series of waterfalls, each property spilling excess snowmelt down to the next level. The next morning, March 16th, contractors arrived. Teresa had found a local company willing to come out on emergency terms. I watched from my back deck as a crew worked their way up the hill, using metal rakes, shovels, and even a small excavator to clear the storm drains one by one. It took them 3 days to clear all the drains in the subdivision. The damage, however, was already done. 9 homeowners reported basement flooding. 3 had foundation damage. David Park's basement had to be completely gutted and rebuilt. The total damage was estimated at over $200,000. On March 20th, I received a letter from Patricia Henderson's attorney demanding I pay $15,000 in damages for deliberately refusing to maintain drainage on your property, leading to extensive flooding and property damage to other homeowners. I forwarded it to Linda without opening the attachment. She called me within minutes. "Please tell me you're joking." I wish I was. "Zach, this is so far beyond frivolous it's almost criminal. I'm going to respond to this, but I'm also going to recommend to the new HOA board that they pursue legal action against Patricia Henderson and the previous board for breach of fiduciary duty and potential fraud." "Will that go anywhere?" "That depends on what the audit shows. If they really did misappropriate funds earmarked for maintenance, yes, it could result in criminal charges. At minimum, they could be held personally liable for damages." 2 weeks later, the audit results came back. Teresa called an emergency HOA meeting to present the findings. I sat in the same clubhouse, which was once again packed, as Teresa stood at the front with a thick report in her hands. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," Teresa began. "The audit revealed significant financial mismanagement. Over the past 3 years, approximately $14,000 budgeted for drainage system maintenance was transferred to the general fund and used for other purposes." Angry murmurs filled the room. "What purposes?" someone called out. Teresa flipped through the report. "Some of it went to what's listed as community events, which appear to be holiday parties and board member appreciation dinners. Some went to landscaping improvements in the common areas that weren't budgeted. And approximately $4,000 was paid to various board members for what's described as administrative services, which is not allowed under our governing documents." "They stole from us," David Park said flatly. "Legally, it's more complicated than outright theft," Teresa said. "But it's definitely misappropriation of funds and breach of fiduciary duty. The interim board has voted to pursue legal action against the previous board members to recover these funds." "What about the damage to our homes?" Helen Torres asked. "My insurance won't cover the flooding because they claim it's a maintenance issue." "That's the difficult part," Teresa admitted. The HOA's liability insurance may cover some of it, but there's a significant deductible. We may need to do a special assessment to cover the repairs, or we may be able to recover funds from the previous board members. That depends on how the legal proceedings go. I raised my hand. What about the fines that were issued? I was fined $1,700 for not clearing the drains. Any fines issued by the previous board for drainage-related issues are void, Teresa said firmly. The new board voted unanimously to rescind all such fines. If you paid anything, you'll be refunded. The meeting continued for another hour, with Teresa outlining the steps being taken to restore proper HOA governance and address the flooding damage. I left feeling somewhat vindicated but also concerned about the legal battle ahead. That concern was warranted. On April 3rd, Patricia Henderson filed a lawsuit against me personally, claiming I had intentionally caused flooding through negligence and demanding $60,000 in damages. Her suit claimed that water from my property had directly caused damage to hers and 2 other board members' properties. Linda filed a countersuit on my behalf, along with filing suit against Patricia and the other former board members on behalf of the HOA for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and negligence. What followed was 6 months of legal wrangling, depositions, document production, mediation attempts. Patricia insisted she'd done nothing wrong, that the drainage funds had been properly allocated, and that I was responsible for the flooding because I lived at the top of the hill and had refused to maintain basic drainage. The case finally went to trial in October 2024. I sat in Montrose County District Court for 4 days, listening to testimony from contractors, engineers, homeowners, and board members. The engineer's testimony was particularly damning. He explained that the storm drainage system was designed to handle snowmelt, but only if regularly maintained. He showed photos of the drains before they were cleared in March, demonstrating that they'd been neglected for years, not just the few weeks I'd stopped clearing them. He calculated that the damage would have occurred regardless of my actions, because the entire system was clogged, not just the drains on my property. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that I'd set a precedent by maintaining the drains for 2 years, and that my sudden refusal was vindictive and intended to cause damage. Linda destroyed that argument in her closing. Mr. Morrison spent 2 years performing maintenance that he wasn't obligated to perform, that he was actively deceived about by Miss Henderson, and that the HOA was being paid to handle through homeowner dues. When he discovered the deception, he stopped providing free labor. That's not vindictive. That's reasonable. What's vindictive is Miss Henderson's attempt to fine him, threaten him, and now sue him for refusing to do her job. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found in my favor on all counts, dismissed Patricia's suit entirely, and awarded me $45,000 in damages for legal fees, harassment, and emotional distress. The ruling against Patricia and the other board members in the HOA's lawsuit came down 2 weeks later. They were found to have breached their fiduciary duty and were ordered to repay the misappropriated funds plus damages, totaling just over $70,000 split between the 5 board members. But it wasn't over yet. In November, the Colorado Attorney General's office opened an investigation into potential criminal fraud. Apparently, one of the homeowners who'd suffered flooding damage had filed a complaint, and the AG's office had taken interest in the case. On January 8, 2025, Patricia Henderson was arrested and charged with theft and fraud. The investigation revealed that in addition to the misappropriated drainage funds, she'd been paying herself nearly $1,500 per month for administrative services that weren't authorized. Over her 4-year tenure as HOA president, she'd taken more than $70,000 from HOA funds. Sharon Klein was also charged, though with lesser offenses, since she'd only received about $12,000 in unauthorized payments. The other 3 board members weren't charged criminally, though they were still liable in the civil suits. I watched the news coverage of Patricia's arrest from my living room. The report showed her being led out of her house in handcuffs, her face hidden behind her hands, her husband shouting at the cameras. It was surreal, seeing someone I'd interacted with so many times reduced to a criminal defendant on the evening news. Robert came over that night with beer, like he'd done so many times over the past year. "Think she'll do time?" he asked, settling into a chair on my back deck. It was January, cold and snowy again, but my deck was covered and we had a propane heater going. "Linda thinks she might get probation if she pleads out," I said. "But if she fights it and loses, probably 18 months to 2 years. All because she didn't want to spend $5,000 a year on clearing storm drains." "No," I corrected. "All because she wanted to take that $5,000 for herself and got greedy." We sat in silence for a while, watching snow fall gently across the neighborhood. The storm drains were now maintained by a professional service, contracted by the HOA, visiting monthly during winter and after any significant snowfall. It cost the HOA $4,200 annually, less than what had been budgeted all along. "You ever regret pushing back?" Robert asked. I thought about it. The stress, the legal fees, the 18 months of my life consumed by HOA drama and lawsuits. But I also thought about the 9 families who'd suffered flood damage, the money that had been stolen, and Patricia Henderson's smug face when she tried to manipulate me into doing work that wasn't my responsibility. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it." Patricia Henderson pleaded guilty in March 2025 to reduced charges of theft and fraud. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years probation, and ordered to pay full restitution of $73,000. Sharon Klein pleaded guilty to lesser charges and received probation and community service. The civil cases were settled. The 5 former board members were jointly and severally liable for the drainage-related damages, plus the legal fees incurred by the HOA. Most of them ended up having to sell their homes in Pinewood Springs to pay the judgments. Patricia's house went into foreclosure. She and her husband divorced while she was serving her sentence. Last I heard, she was living in a trailer park in Grand Junction, working at a grocery store to make her restitution payments. Teresa Flynn agreed to serve as permanent HOA president after the interim period ended. Under her leadership, Pinewood Springs has become a model of good HOA governance. Financial statements are distributed monthly. Board meetings are open and well attended. Maintenance is performed on schedule and professionally. The 2025 winter was milder than the previous 2, but the drainage system handled it perfectly. The contractors cleared the drains regularly, water flowed properly, and when spring came, there was no flooding. Not a single basement got wet. I still live at the top of Pinewood Springs on Summit Ridge. I still have 3 storm drains on my property, and I don't touch them. Every month, I watch the contractor's truck come through, and their crew clears every drain in the subdivision, including mine. They do it efficiently, professionally, and thoroughly. Sometimes I think about Patricia's first visit to my door, thanking me for maintaining the drains, encouraging me to keep doing it. How easy it would have been to just keep going, never questioning, never reading the actual documents. How many years I might have spent providing free labor while she pocketed the money that should have paid for it. But I also think about all the people who never push back, never question, never read the fine print. The people who just accept what they're told by authority figures and assume those people have their best interests at heart. The lesson isn't complicated. Read your governing documents. Know your actual obligations, not just what someone tells you they are. And when you discover you're being deceived or manipulated, stand your ground. The storm drains got cleared eventually. The flooding happened anyway because years of neglect can't be undone by a few weeks of action. The person responsible faced consequences. And the neighborhood is better now than it was before. On a warm evening in May 2025, I was sitting on my back deck watching the sunset when Robert came over. He'd brought beer as usual, but also a folder. "What's that?" I asked. "Letter from Teresa. The insurance settlement came through for everyone's flood damage. Between the insurance, the judgments against the former board, and some creative budget reallocation, everyone's getting fully reimbursed. Even David's basement. Plus, the HOA's setting up a reserve fund specifically for emergency maintenance. Can't be touched for anything else." I took the beer he offered and twisted off the cap. Who would have thought that reading the fine print could cause this much chaos? "It wasn't reading it that caused the chaos," Robert said, settling into a chair. "The chaos was already there, hidden under the surface. You just brought it into the light." He was right, of course. The mismanagement, the stolen funds, the neglect, it was all happening before I ever questioned anything. I'd just been the catalyst that exposed it. We sat there as the sun dropped behind the San Juan Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Snow still capped the highest peaks, but down in the valley, everything was green and alive. The neighborhood spread out below us, houses lit from within, families having dinner, living their lives. No flooded basements, no angry meetings, no fraud. Just a normal HOA, functioning the way it was supposed to function all along. "You ever miss the drama?" Robert asked, grinning. "Not even a little bit," I said, but I'd learned something valuable through the whole mess. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to do something that isn't your responsibility. Stand your ground. Know your rights. Don't let people manipulate you into carrying their burden. The storm drains were their responsibility all along. They just needed someone to force them to actually fulfill it. And if that meant letting spring melt flood some basements to prove a point, then that's what had to happen. Not because I wanted anyone to suffer damage, but because that was the natural consequence of years of neglect and fraud. The flooding was going to happen eventually, whether I cleared those drains or not. The system was too compromised, too long neglected. I just stopped delaying the inevitable. And in doing so, I exposed a much deeper problem that needed to be addressed. Would I do it again, knowing everything I know now? Knowing the stress, the legal battles, the 18 months consumed by this mess? Absolutely. Every time. Because at the end of the day, I sleep well knowing I did the right thing. I didn't let myself be manipulated. I didn't let a corrupt HOA board continue stealing from my neighbors. And I didn't let Patricia Henderson bully me into submission. The storm drains are clear now. The water flows properly. The neighborhood is healthy, and I never have to pick up a shovel to clear a drain again. Because that was never my job in the first place. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop doing what you were never supposed to be doing. Let the chips fall where they may. Let the water flow where it will. Eventually, everything finds its proper level. You just have to be patient enough to let it happen.